Greetings, fanatics. Don and I wanted to join you today to give you a quick update coming off the Road to Nationals that we had in the Netherlands this past weekend, where I managed to go second with a Katsu control deck. So we just wanted to give you a small update on the deck itself, have a few quick fire questions, and a little bit of a discussion about control within the FAB meta and where it sits now. So I'm going to hand over to Don, who's going to throw those quick fire questions over.
Yeah, so before we get to that, we had a 52-person event. The first really big event
Yeah.
for Flesh and Blood after the whole pandemic. Well, it's still going on, but
Yeah.
let's talk about that right now. Let's delve into what you think of the deck you've played, and I've got a couple questions for you. Let's start off with the first one because you played Katsu Control. What does control mean in FAB?
Yeah, I guess every card game has control as an archetype, and it comes in various shapes and forms. And we've heard the term control in FAB for a while now. I think the first time it really came around was when we saw something similar to this Katsu control deck in and around, I think it was the Calling or maybe some of the Nationals tournaments we had last year, where there was this kind of control deck that focused on a strategy which similar to this deck, which ultimately is block out as many attacks as possible, pitch a blue every turn, Kadachi, Kadachi, play a one cost attack. And ultimately that's been the synergy for a lot of ninja type control decks, be they Katsu and Iroh when we had the skirmish season. And I think we are kind of mislabeling these as control decks because for the most part, you're not really controlling anything. They're more like, I want to call them something like defense decks, because in every other card game I've played, and I've played most of them, control is a very specific archetype in that what you're doing is trying to control the game, either with kill spells or big ways to stop your opponent. But for the most part, control really kind of epitomizes you having to think harder than your opponent and outplay them at every turn. And I feel like in FAB, whilst I'm sure some of the control decks do have that kind of
Mm-hmm.
strenuous thought pattern you have to go through, at
Yeah.
least in these Katsu control decks, you don't have to think much, right? I mean, you are literally defend, defend. I mean, you're running 12 defense reactions. You're defending, pitching blue, Kadachi, Kadachi, attack for 4 or 5, and that's your entire game. And there are parts where you have to change up that game plan slightly because you may find yourselves in situations where you're going to deck yourself before your opponents because they're pitching more heavily than you. For example, in a Prism tank match, which is one of the
Yeah.
games I'm sure we'll talk about later, they're pitching more heavily than you, even though they're drawing more. So you're going to kind of run out of cards quicker than them. But for the most part, I feel like we're wrongly defining a lot of these decks as control. And in the future of FAB, I'm interested to see what path control takes because I really would like to see
Yeah.
control being more heavily involved in you ultimately trying to outthink your opponent at every step of the game.
Right. Well, maybe you are oversimplifying a couple of things because I don't think like it's not just defending, right? I mean there are a couple of decision points during matchups where you don't defend with a defense reaction right away. Maybe you block 6 first, you keep a defense reaction in your hand. Well, those are all plays we maybe can discuss later on in the video. A follow-up question: control in Flesh and Blood. Does that automatically mean you try to fatigue your opponent?
Good point. I guess that one of the reasons I ended on this deck list was you and I and a few other people had a discussion about is there the possibility to devise a deck that tries to fatigue your opponent in every match? And that's literally the strategy of the deck is to
Yeah.
fatigue your opponent. Now, ultimately decided not to do that specifically because you're on a time limit, and even if you're playing quickly, your opponent might not be doing so, and it just won't always work. But I
Right.
think to answer your question, no. And a lot of the time, you don't really want it to come down to fatigue. I think a large part of it is you pitching a lot of your powerful effects early to see them late in the game when your
Right.
opponent has run out of those effects. And I guess that is
Yeah.
how I would define the large majority of control decks in Flesh and Blood is pitch your strong effects early, win the game
Right.
late. Naturally, that does sometimes mean that your opponent will fatigue themselves. Certainly,
Yeah.
decks like Chain, but for a lot, it just will mean you win because you've pitched your stronger effects early.
Yeah. So, but before we go to the deck, one follow-up question. Fatigue. I think it can mean two things, right? Fatigue can mean like you literally run out of cards in your deck, but fatigue, in my view, also means like you just described, your opponent runs out of threats. It's also a way of fatiguing your opponent in Flesh and Blood, right?
Yeah,
Or do
yeah.
you see
Um,
that differently?
I guess I would take the pure definition of it is that your opponent is going
Right.
to run out of cards completely.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think once you get to the point that you're trying to, and you hear this a lot, right? Once you're getting to the point that you're trying to improve your gameplay, it all comes down to pitch order, and ultimately, exactly as you say, you trying to outplay your opponent by pitching cards that are powerful, so that later in the game your opponent has run out of their strong threats and you are less fatigued than they are in order for you to finish them off.
All right. I think we should go to the deck list itself.
Yep.
Um, Maybe we already talked a little bit about what the deck does. Um, Key cards that you found really useful during the tournament. If you could name three, what three would those be?
I guess I'll kick this off by saying this isn't a something that I came up with completely myself. I just took one of the deck lists that I found from the Devastation tournament, where I think anyone wanting to build a deck, that's a great place to start. Yes, they need tweaking a little bit because they were designed for a specific meta, but if you want a good starting block, that's a good place to go. I think because I'd not played Control before, there were a few cards that stood out to me when I was first going through the deck. So first and foremost, things like Brutal Assault, Nourishing Emptiness. Um, if you look at that on face value, you're thinking, why are you playing that? Because for the large part of it, they're just going to be 2 cost, 6 attack with blank text. But ultimately, that's exactly what you want them to be, is on those
Yeah.
turns where you've got the tunic resource rather than going Kadachi Kadachi attack for a 1 cost card for 3, 4, or 5. You're going Kadachi Kadachi pay 2, attack for 6, which is
Yeah.
just a bigger threat overall for your opponent. So I guess that's the first thing that stood out to me within the deck. The second thing is the fact that it runs. How many is it total? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 defense reactions, which is a lot. And initially, I was thinking, surely that's just going to be too many defense reactions. A lot of the time, you're only boarding in the unmovables, but it's
Hmm.
still, 25-ish% of your deck is just defense reactions. But there were so many games in which I was thinking to myself, man, I wish I could find a defense reaction right now. So that was one thing that stood out to me. And I guess the last one, and mainly this is for me more specifically than a lot of players, is trying to understand how to play snag, because I still don't really understand what's the best moment for me to play it. And every time I played it, even in chain games where they had multiple rift binds that they'd banished, it still felt underwhelming.
Hmm.
But I think it's certainly a card that I want to learn to play more, because stepping into Tales of Aria, I think control something that I want to focus more heavily on, and therefore I think Snag is certainly a card that I need to understand better how to play.
Yeah, I think Snag is one of those cards that will be in the meta for some time and then it will be out of the meta. It's kind of, I feel like moving forward. Kano is one of those decks, like it will be in the meta, people will play no rune, it will get out of the meta and that will change. Same goes for Snag. I think we will see it at some point and we will also see it disappear.
Yep.
All right. Um, One question about those defense reactions. I've been thinking about this. Why red unmovable? Isn't yellow sufficient enough? Looking at the amount of attacks and what kind of damage people can do.
I think for a lot of decks, I would, and I do when I'm deck building, tend to opt for yellow or even blue unmovables. I think this is one of the first decks in a long time that I feel like red is the correct choice, and that's simply due to the fact that you don't need the pitch value, because you've got enough blues that you can consistently hit a blue card per turn. Like if I can loosely recall the amount of turns that I didn't have a blue that I could pitch to do what I mentioned earlier, the Kodachi attack.
Yeah,
It was very few and far between, and therefore having the red unmovable just in those matches that you need it. So specifically, I would side it in against things like Guardian, Prism, Dorinthia on occasion if I had a loose understanding of what they were trying to do, because then you do need that 7 or 8 block, and 7 is kind of the key point, right? If
yeah,
you're
exactly.
playing against Prism specifically,
Yeah.
which was one of the main decks I was siding it in against, if you can't get it into Arsenal, being able to block for 7 on some turns can be really crucial.
All right, so let's move away from the defense reactions and move on to the next question. Did you ever create a Z state token?
No, I don't think I did. In fact, there was one point in one of the games where I was curious what some of the cards did, because to be frank, unless I needed to play them, they were just generic blues that I was pitching. And I was
Yeah.
reading one of them that said something about a Zen state token. I remember thinking to myself, if I create a Zen state token, I don't have a Zen state token. So thankfully, I didn't find myself in that position. So,
All right, I think that because we have a very diverse meta. We had 8 different heroes in top 8, which
yeah.
is
And I
very,
think
very
it was the
unique.
same either in the first road to nationals or the second road to nationals. That again, we had 8 different heroes in the top 8, which is really cool.
Yep, we had Azealia and Levia in top 8.
Yep.
So there were also I think 2 Viserai OTK decks going around.
Yeah, that was the Sonata OTK deck, right, that they were playing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but I also guess like creating a Zen state token against that deck is beautiful. But it yeah, I mean there's nothing they can do after. Well, they can still do their big attack, but nothing really is. There's
Yep.
nothing really happening after that.
Yep.
And I think creating a Zen state token against Chain would also be really good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I got really lucky in the one chain game that I played purely due to the fact that my opponent banished 3 Art of
Yep.
Wars and they ran out of cards. But other than that, it would certainly have helped for sure.
Or Prism Aura for that matter, right?
Yep.
Because they will be able to ping you with
Yep.
any damage.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So let's go through your matchups quickly. Um, First round.
Yeah, first round I played a new player, really lovely guy. It was his first big tournament. He decided that he wanted to have fun, so he bought Azalea. Um, and I think because it was his first tournament, and at least from the games that I had or have tested with,
Mhm.
Katsu control is awful for Azalea because you can shut down effectively everything they're trying to do with the large majority of your defense reactions.
Yeah.
Um, so I think at the end of the game, I was still on 32 health when he died. But it was a nice ending at the end of the game. We had a good chat, and I opened my prize packs and opened a Carrion Husk Rainbow foil. So it was a good game overall.
Yeah, that's not bad at all.
Yeah,
Imagine this deck being able to play Carrion Husk.
yeah, that would be insane. That would be insane. Although the ninja wouldn't be very useful if he was having to walk around in
Yeah.
some Carrion Husk. But
Yeah, fair enough. So let's move on to the second round.
yeah, so round 2, I played a guy on, again, a reasonably new guy came over from Magic the Gathering. He was also playing Katsu, but more of a Katsu aggro deck. Um, the game was pretty back and forth, but it got towards the end of the game, and going back to what we were saying earlier, ultimately came down fatigue. Is that I pitched and sunk and enlightened strike a lot of my big attacks to the bottom of my deck. I think we played for about 55 minutes, so he'd gone through most of his deck and I'd gone through mine. And at the end of the game, I was just able to keep applying pressure by coming back through to those powerful red attacks that I'd put to the bottom of my deck earlier in the game.
Yeah, I think that matchup you should be able to win it 9 out of 10 times, I
Yep,
guess, because you can pretty much block every attack they will throw at you. Of course, you take the Kodachi hits, but that goes both ways.
yep, yep,
So there's a clock on every match.
yep.
All right, so let's move over to the third match.
Yeah, now I need to remember exactly where it was that I lost which game. So I think game three, game three.
Play
Um
you play Prison Game 3?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if game three was against Prism or game four was against Prism, but we'll just assume it was game three. So game
Yeah.
three, I played against the guy that I would later play again in the finals. He was on a Prism tank build, and I played him in the first Road to Nationals. So I'd seen a little bit of what the deck was trying to do, and I
Mhm.
knew going into that game that I was going to have a difficult time because, simply put, his deck can outperform me in so many different ways. So I don't have very many six power attacks to attack him with, and if I use those six power attacks, I have very little threats myself to swing back. So you have to be really careful in understanding when you're going to use them to block and when you're going to use them to attack. And the game ultimately came down to a certain point where we'd both been pitching our threats to come into the game later, but he pivoted at one point to move away from just trying to go beat down and started spawning lots of spectral shields and playing down lots more auras. So there were turn after turn of merciful retribution and spectral shields, which when I'm trying to go Kadachi Kadachi, just pinging against a spectral shield, taking damage back, that was just game over for me. I simply couldn't do anything without killing myself, and that's how I ended up losing the game. Was attacking into him with a Kadachi, he instanted in merciful retribution for me to then take the last damage and die.
Yeah, that is a sad ending. I guess also the boots
Yep,
are just so good against Kadachi. I
yep.
mean, you pay 3, you make a token, and you block with the
Yeah,
other resources you have
it's
left.
perfect against Kadachi control Katsu
Yeah.
decks. Yeah, for
So
sure.
all the chip damage you're trying to do is just not efficient
Yep,
anymore.
yep.
And you just also lack the equipment, I guess, to fully block, keep blocking, especially when they come for 7, right? That's
Yeah,
not
you
an
just
ideal
can't get
number.
the threats back, and he
Yeah.
saw library maybe quite early in this game, maybe turn four or turn five. So he was just seeing so many more cards that I just couldn't contend with
Yeah.
the damage he was putting down.
Yeah, looking at the deck list, playing 6 yellows, there's no
Yeah,
way you're gonna get
exactly.
rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just can't
I-
contend.
I- Is that something you would change in the future, or is it something that can be helped, making the deck too inefficient? Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, even though it potentially lost me the final
Mhm.
because of a similar match that we'll come to later, but I don't think I would change the deck exactly as you say. I think you end up just
Yeah.
being too inefficient because you need blue for three pitch and you need red for power. And if you have yellow, you're effectively just diluting the effectiveness of both of those things that you need in the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Gotcha. Okay. Fourth match.
Yeah, game four played a super interesting game. So it was the top ranked Belgian guy, Kugain Gaming on YouTube for
Oh,
anyone
yeah.
who wants to follow along. He played a Axe's Dorinthia deck, which I had never played before, literally had no understanding of what the deck wanted to try and do. But after a few turns, it quickly became apparent that he was trying to do something similar to me, but I was fairly confident with the tools in my deck that I would be able to do it better.
Hmm.
The frustrating part was he was playing Valiant Dynamo, and every turn he was attacking with both of the axes. So one of my Kodachi hits every round was doing nothing, so my mask was useless the entire game. So it was a lot of back and forth, me getting through significantly less damage because one Kodachi not going through every turn for 10, 15 turns is a lot of damage. But at the end of the day, we both again came down to fewer and fewer cards in deck. I was pitching and aggressively putting my threats to the bottom, and those came back around, and I was able to just push through the damage to get over the finish line. I think what I learned from the Dorinthia Axis deck is that while it's I don't want to sound too derogatory to the deck, but it's cute in terms of what it does. It doesn't do enough for it to get enough damage through. I mean, one of the crucial turns that really switched the game around, that it may have gone a different way, and I may then have thought something different about the deck, but um, by pure luck rather than deliberate gameplay, I was able to play Kodachi into Command and Conquer on the
Hmm.
turn that he put Spoils of War into his arsenal, and his hand was full of defense reactions. He couldn't defend enough to get the hit over because it was one of the few turns he wasn't able to double attack to remove the counter off the Dynamo. So I was able to push the damage through. He lost the Spoils of War, which would have been huge, and he didn't see another Spoils of War for the rest of the game in order for him to get that dominate big swing through with the axes. So that was a big part of the game too.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important that you can land a hit and then take the tempo out of the game, or
Yep.
to get back to tempo.
Yep.
All right. Last game is Swiss.
Yeah. So the last game of Swiss I played against, Chain. So that was the only Chain game I'd seen all day. I expected to see way more Chain matchups, and it was one of the few that I dreaded because I'd had two games with Chain myself to practice, try and understand how the deck went, and honestly had no idea of what was going on. So the game itself was probably my most fun game of the day because so many crazy things happened. So I mentioned earlier when we were talking that he banished three Art of Wars. So one was, I believe, turn two or turn three, and then the next turn after he banished two Art of Wars off the top in the same turn. So that gave me a bit of peace of mind that at least I wouldn't see that threat coming down later. Um, I did quite a lot of damage early because, for those that don't know, Chain's not good at blocking, so you can tend to find that they will defend very little. Certainly, if they've got particular hands that are very heavy on two blocks or a lot of instants, etc., they'll just take the hit. So I
Yeah.
pushed ahead on life total quite early and got him down to I think about 21. Um, and then I ran out of some threats myself because I played a few and put a few to the bottom. He then started to swing back really aggressively, and I was on the back foot for so long. And we had 5 or 6 turns where he was shackling turn after turn after turn, and got to the point that he was on shackle 6, 7, and then 8, and I was just holding on for dear life. And
Yeah.
there was some luck involved that I saw flick flacks and combo cards and unmovables and various things in a certain sequence of events that led to me being able to defend more effectively,
Hmm.
alongside the fact that I forget specifically how it happened, but I was. Oh, that was why we went so long in the game that I knew his pitch cycle. I knew his only real threats left in the deck was in Vexing Malice, so multiple arcane damage. So I had to
Yeah.
be able to pitch blue every turn to keep blocking arcane because I was at this point on one life for 3 turns, I think, with him shackling 6 or 7
Wow.
cards. And then was just able to block out basically perfectly every turn. And then he ended up with less and less cards in deck to the point that I could just swing back and take the game. So I
Yeah.
think if I reflect on the game, I didn't deserve to win. I got very lucky with the sequence of
Mhm.
events, but hey, sometimes that's what happens in the card games, right? You get the luck on your side, and that's what happened in this game.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was your game plan going into that game, or was it like you didn't really have a game plan, or?
My game plan was basic in terms of, like I said a bit earlier, try and do some damage early when Chain isn't
Mhm.
able to threaten that much back against
Yeah.
you, so you can be a bit more secure in your hand. You know you're not going to have to use everything at your disposal to block what's coming your way. So be
Yeah.
aggressive early, and then at the point where he was on 4 or 5 shackles, at least when I could see what was
Mhm.
hitting the banished zone, to be able to do some kind of analysis of what I expected to come at me. At that point, pivot and start blocking and hope that you can either poke back enough in your turns to put him low enough in life total that you can finish him off, or try and go for a true fatigue win, which is me then trying to block him out enough that I knew I could win the game. I don't
Right.
know if that's the correct strategy, but it certainly seemed to work in this game.
Right. One last question in this matchup. Did you draw a lot of cards from Mask? Because I can imagine like they just take the Kodachi hits and then try to maybe block you on on the third
Yeah,
swing.
so Didier played it pretty well, to be honest. So I think of the first 4 turns, which is when I was aggressively attacking. One turn I got a mask trigger, I think. There
Hmm.
was one turn where he used his husk, so we used husk quite early to block out,
Yeah.
which also helped me put through some chip damage. And the other 2 turns, he blocked the Kodachi with a card from his hand. On I think most of the time it was the second Kodachi swing. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
yeah.
Okay. So you made it to top eight.
Yeah, 5-1 into top eight. So, like we said earlier, the top eight was very diverse.
Yeah.
So much so that my first match of the top eight was against Lavia deck. So again, one of the things I loved about this tournament was there were so many new people into the game that were so passionate about it. So we're just having a really good time chatting about how they got into the game. And this guy said he was kind of in love with Brute and brought Lavia to this game. I think it was a reasonably easy win for me. That there was never a point that I felt truly threatened, just because even if they're able to do 2 attacks a turn for 6 on average at most, that's reasonably easy for me to block out with the deck and still be able to swing back with enough
Yeah.
power to put damage down. And he was banishing so many cards that at a certain point he had to start blocking. And I think that the game ultimately was won by him taking an insane amount of damage from Blood Debt just because he had to block out some turns. So yeah, it was fun to play against Levia, especially in the top eight. I didn't expect to
Yeah.
see it at all. I got so lucky as well that I had one spot left in my 80 cards. Randomly decided after seeing Eric doing so well at the first Road to Nationals that maybe more people would bring Brute. Threw a Gambler's Gloves in there, and one of the crucial turns towards the end was able to make him re-roll from him getting multiple action points to just hitting a 2, so getting a 1 action point. So that paid off in the end as well.
Yeah. That certainly helps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we're moving up to top four.
Yep. So top 4 played a guy called Lawrence, who I
Hmm.
played a game of L5R against 3, 4 years ago. I can't remember what it was. So I recognised his face, and we
Yeah.
kind of briefly touched on that. So it was nice to kind of see people coming over from other games. This
Yeah.
game was he was playing Guardian, which I'm thankful, Don, that you and I have played so many games against Guardian and also against one of our other friends, Chris, who also plays a lot of Guardian. So it's probably the most well-known matchup for me.
Hmm.
He early had a lot of red threats coming down onto the table, but for various reasons wasn't able to or chose not to play them with dominate. And because I had my 3 unmovables that we discussed earlier and the other defense reactions, I was never getting hit by the crush effect. So I was able to swing back and do damage. The game really, though, kind of turned on an axis where we knew we were at about 45 minutes and we were both around 10, 12 life, so it was super neck and
Hmm.
neck. he had slightly more cards in deck than me. But the good thing about Katsu is even if they have slightly more cards in deck, you threaten so much more with a Kadachi for one. And there then came a point after a few turns with me spending 2 cards to be able to block out his hammer. Like I said earlier, he didn't have any of his big threats left, really. He missed a few blessing triggers. So I was
Yeah.
able to slowly whittle him down to the point that he had to start blocking. And then when time was called, we both had 4 or 5 cards left in deck. I was on
Oh,
7 life and he was on 4 life. So it came down to life total, which I must admit didn't feel like an honourable victory, but I guess there has to be a tiebreaker. I just don't like the personally don't like the one additional turn. It would be nice if there was a bit more because even though we were both playing quickly, it just felt like
yeah.
the wrong way to win.
Yeah, normally these top eights are not timed.
Yeah,
Well, you can still decide whether or not you play them timed, but I think just not time them is the right call
yeah,
eventually. If you
yeah,
have the time to
yeah,
actually do that during a tournament, because it was also a long day.
yeah.
Um, so one question about this matchup: Hammer for 4. Is that more annoying than Hammer for 6?
I guess it depends on your hand.
Yeah.
Um, because you're running
Yeah.
quite a lot of defense reactions that block for 4, you can get lucky on some turns. I think that the difficult part as well, though, is that I very rarely want to use my defense reactions against Guardian to just block a hammer. I really want to save them, even if it's just a Fate Foreseen or a Sink Below Reds. I want to save them for the crush turns because that one extra block that you can put through can mean you're not getting crushed.
Right.
So you have to be really tactical on what you're using to block the turns out. But I would say for the most part, it didn't really matter much if it was 4 or 6. I'm
Yeah.
less likely to take a 6 than I am a 4. But there certainly were turns where I would just take the 6.
Okay. Um, right. Uh, Sad that Guardian didn't make it to the finals. But
Yeah,
hey, what can you do?
yeah, you need to do
No.
better next time, man. So
Absolutely true. Yep. Um, yeah. So finals.
yeah,
Going in for that tunic.
yeah. So as I said earlier, played up
Yep.
against Renee again, who I'd now played twice, knew exactly what his deck was trying to do, and to be honest, knew stepping into the game that my chances of winning were probably somewhere between 10 and 20%.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
Early in the game, it was quite a beautiful game to watch.
Mhm.
First and foremost, because the first couple of turns we were both so tired, I at least was making terrible mistakes, like blocking with 2 cards on Herald turns when one of them was a 6 attack card.
Sixer. Ouch. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So quickly took some sips of coffee, and then that stabilized my brain to focus on what was going on.
Yeah.
But why it was nice was it felt like a game of chess because we both knew what we were trying to do, and we're both going for this control archetype that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
But we're both watching what we're pitching. So I was watching him pitching Herald of Eruditions, various other strong power cards, and he was watching me pitching Enlightened Strikes, Command and Conquers, various other things. Side note, difficult to pitch things like Command and Conquer in this matchup because you need to weigh up: do I want to use it to block or do I want to put it later in the game? But
Yeah.
that kind of cat and mouse chess effect led to us both trying to outplay each other every turn in
Mhm.
terms of how we were doing that and when we wanted to start applying pressure. I
Yeah.
think that the turning point was around turn 9. He saw his Great Library of Solana, and as we discussed
Right.
earlier, I don't have enough yellows to be able to cancel or
Yeah.
gain benefit from that myself. And that then meant he could escalate the point that he saw those threats that he'd pitched earlier a lot sooner than I could see the threats that I'd pitched early. And
Mhm.
he was also running things like Tome of Divinity to get more draw effects through the deck. So When I saw the first Herald of Erudition, I knew at that point I was still 15 plus cards away from my power cards, and had run out a lot of my blocking power. And he was there was one turn that just completely sealed the deal, which ended up being the final turn of the game, where he was able to go Herald of Erudition. This is off a 5 card hand plus Arsenal, right? Herald of Erudition into Herald of Erudition into Tome of Divinity into so many cards that he could just put through effectively my entire life total in one turn, which was beautiful to see. That kind of huge raw power of the deck coming through at the point that it all came together in one fell swing. So I think he was on 4 life, maybe 4 or 5 life himself at the end
Yeah.
of the game. So it came close, but that doesn't do the game justice. That I knew I was so far behind and really was never going to be able to be a contender in the game. So second place, but I think a well deserved win for Rene, who's playing Prism, because he played better than me the entire match.
Yeah, I guess it's also just like you said, a very bad matchup for you.
Yeah,
Um, Especially when you play control and you know your opponent is playing library, so it will show up
yeah,
eventually.
yeah,
Um, if your opponent sees it early, yeah, there's no chance of winning the game
yeah, yeah,
at all.
yeah.
Your chances are diminishing
And
right
especially as
away.
well things like alongside him having card advantage, spectral shields, auras mean I'm just doing less chip damage overall, so it just really diminishes the power of the deck, that you're not finding those small advantages as often as you would do in other matchups.
Yeah. Last question. Do you think Katsu, if you play the aggro version, that it is a good contender against Prism?
I guess against tank Prism,
Hmm.
yes, because we call this build tank Prism, but it's not that tanky in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
a little bit of it is uh, offense is the best form of defense, that you're putting enough threats against your opponent and blocking where you can with your auras, etc. But the thing against aggro Katsu is it's just so much faster. So you have to judge and weigh, do you think you can race Prism? I think if
Yeah.
you're playing against Herald aggro Prism, you probably lose that race, but certainly against Tank Prism, you can outvalue them a lot of the time, yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, congrats on your second place.
Thank you.
Pretty impressive. I want to end with saying it was really one of the best events I've been to so far. The venue was great.
Yep.
The people were really lovely. It was also, like we mentioned at the beginning of the video, one of the first events after after Corona. So we were all just very happy that we could come together and play this fantastic game.
Yeah, and I guess just to reiterate on that is being a card game player, you and I have played many card games together over the years, but
Yeah,
what we always look for is a game in which we enjoy to play the game itself, but the real passion is in the community that surrounds it. And I
yeah,
think in Flesh and Blood, we've really found that sweet spot, that the game is enjoyable. It's very rarely a dull game. You're always enjoying, even if you lose, but the community around it as well is absolutely fantastic. Like a really mature audience that wants to go and have a good time. And specifically, I think the distinction between Flesh and Blood and other games, at least from what I've seen myself, I'm
yeah,
sure this changes at higher competitive events, but from what we've seen, a lot of it is people are going to have fun, and if they do well in games, that's a bonus. They're not going to play games, and if they have fun, that's a bonus, right? It's really about that community spirit, enjoying each other's
yep,
company, and having a really good time playing the game. So
absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
awesome! Thanks, Don. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks everyone
Great
for
fun.
watching Fanatics, and I guess with spoiler season upon us, stay tuned. We'll have something coming ourselves very soon, And if this is delivered in the future, we can just cut this part of the video off and not have to say it.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Bye bye.